Gentlemen, good morning. This is episode 8 of Sermon Reflections, and this would be part 3, I believe, of the series that we're currently in, Rethinking Suffering. So to start the question off, I'll turn to Kyle. Kyle, fill us in. How's this sermon from Sunday continuing to roll around in your heart and mind?
Keith, I think that's the first time I've ever heard someone use Johnny Cash, Boy Named Sue, as an illustration. But I thought it was good. I mean, I think like what you said, you're like, that's a really, I forget how you put it, meager illustration, but the idea of God doesn't just like put us through suffering and then like stands back, runs away, is like, oh, I'll see you later once you're toughened up. But I thought the perspective of our perspective, we may completely not see what God is doing in it, but knowing that he has purposes in it. I thought the two things that kind of stuck out to me the most was God's goal for us as Christians is not for us to have smooth sailing in this life, but for us to become more mature Christians. And then ultimately your last point, and saying God's glory matters more than your comfort. God's glory matters more than my comfort. I wrote down as something that's, I think that can be a really bitter pill to swallow, because I think it can sound like, well, God's just up there moving me however he wants and doesn't really care about me, only cares about his glory. But I think then I was like, but it makes everything so much sweeter when we see that God's glory is what matters most. That's what should be sweetest to us, what is sweetest to us. And it's our comfort that suffering won't be wasted, even if we never see in this life how God uses it. If he's using it for his glory, we can be confident it will not be wasted. So I thought that last point was really, really good.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Charlie, what's sticking out to you?
Yeah, he was away. He didn't even watch the sermon.
We did. We did get to watch it up in the mountains. It was great. I like the reflection questions that you've been putting at the end, and the one that got me thinking this week was something like, does my faith begin and end with God, or does it begin and end with me? When I'm suffering through something, or when I'm experiencing the opposite of suffering, feeling really good about something, am I concerned about how the situation is going to affect me, or how it is going to glorify God? It's the difference, I think, between being self-centered and being God-centered. I like Psalm 115:1 that you gave to us, Keith. It says, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name goes the glory. The psalmist said it twice, not to us, not to us. So I just really hope and pray that I get that right.
The aspect for me that's sticking out is the imagery of the Craftsman, the Rasp. That would be our God, knowing what he's trying to make of us and removing the parts that don't belong there. Outgrowths, warts, things that would eventually get infected, cause gangrene, and die. And he's like, I'm going to cut this off for your good. But I could also think of maybe not the rasp, but somebody who's going to encourage me at the gym to not just lose weight, but gain muscle. And so the passage in James that consider it joy that you have the opportunity, that you have the opportunity for joy. That opportunity to grow stronger isn't just getting rid of sin, but maybe growing in faith. And I like both aspects of how suffering can cause us to grow. Keith, was there anything that stuck out to you as you were preparing for Sunday?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like I've been, and you guys know what I've been going through lately. I feel like I've been, life is pretty good for me. Other than some pains and aches, life's pretty good. But I feel like lately I've been experiencing some suffering. In fact, Sunday was some bad stuff, Sunday afternoon, and I thought, I really need this series myself right now. as much as anybody does. One of the books that has been more impactful for me personally when it comes to suffering than any other book I've ever read is Chris Tygreen's book, Why a Suffering World Makes Sense. And that title itself is counterintuitive. Why a suffering world? Most times we don't, and like we can explain it and we can share what the Bible says, but makes sense? No, it doesn't make sense. And yet the whole thrust of his book was point 3 on my sermon, that God's glory is paramount. And I'm gonna read just a paragraph in here. He said, our concept of God, particularly in recent Western culture, has been based primarily on love as his foremost characteristic. Suffering clashes with that concept. It doesn't contradict his love as it really is. It contradicts his love as we have come to define it. Somehow we got the impression that the love of God means he should not tolerate our suffering. Our idea of love involves comfort and esteem building. God's love includes heavy doses of character building and a radical redirection of our affection from ourselves to him. That to me is central. A radical redirection of our affections from ourselves to him. He wants us to be strong and love him with all of our hearts. And that means that his honor will become our holy preoccupation. And I think this is a thrust that so much of life, not just suffering, so much of life comes down to, do I love me most or do I love God most? So if I love me most, then all my things matter most. My schedule matters most. I matter more than other people. When God matters most, it radically transforms us as disciples, and we become the disciples, I think, that Jesus has called us to make. So, man, I don't like the Rasp. I don't care for it. But I am absolutely convinced that God means it, not just for our good, though he does, but for his glory. I think that's so central.
That's great. Well, we are going to continue with this at least for another couple of weeks here until we're able to regather in person. And then who knows, maybe by then we'll be able to shoot these videos in person rather than from our offices. If you would, let us know, how is this message and this series striking you? And to help us out moving forward, it would be great if you could hit the subscribe button at the bottom so you can stay up to date with all of the Keystone has for you online. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.